The scene opens with a storyteller standing in front of a crowd in a modern Scandinavian setting. Maybe it's a local pub or a casual evening gathering. The storyteller clears their throat and begins. So let me take you back, way back, like way, way back. Around the mid-10th century to be exact. You know, back when people thought Wi-Fi was just the sound a sword makes when it whizzes by your ear. This is the story of Harald Gråfell. Now, if you're not familiar with him, no worries. He's one of those Norwegian kings who didn't get a Netflix series but still had a decent amount of drama in his life. And believe me, drama was what they did best in the Viking Age. Harald, whose name means grey cloak, and yes, I know that sounds like a medieval superhero, was destined for greatness from an early age. So how was Harald's childhood? Now, Harald was born sometime in the 930s, the son of Eirik Bloodaxe. Yeah, you heard that right, Bloodaxe. Can you imagine that on a name tag at a PTA meeting? Hi, I'm Eirik Bloodaxe, and this is my son Harald. Harald grew up in a time when there was no shortage of swords, betrayals, and of course those long ships that everyone had, but no one really knew how to parallel park. But back to Harald. As a kid, he wasn't really into typical Viking hobbies like raiding or pillaging. No, young Harald was more into hanging out with his siblings, running around on the fjords and plotting how to be king someday. You know, just normal sibling rivalry stuff. If your siblings were all vying for control of entire kingdoms. Harald's rise to power. Fast forward a few years, and Harald's father, Bloodaxe, got himself in some trouble. He was king for a bit, but let's just say that Norwegian politics back then made Game of Thrones look like an episode of the Great British Bake Off. Eric got booted out of power, probably because he thought Bloodaxe was a good nickname for a diplomat, and fled to England, where he eventually met his end. But Harald wasn't about to let a little thing like his dad's demise keep him from making his mark. No, he had ambition. Along with his brothers, Harald started raiding, conquering, and generally making life difficult for his enemies. The guy was determined. At this point, Harald hooked up with a guy named Håkon the Good. You know how in movies there's always that one mentor who seems wise, but you're pretty sure they're going to betray the hero? Well, Håkon was that guy. He helped Harald consolidate his power, but things quickly got awkward. Håkon thought Harald and his brothers were a bit too grabby with the whole let's be kings thing. And well, you can probably guess what happened next. Yes, after some intense family reunions, by which I mean battles, Harald Gråfell declared himself King of Norway. Sort of. It wasn't like he had the entire country under control, but he had enough swords pointed at enough people to make them say, yeah, sure, whatever you say, Your Majesty. Now, Harald wasn't content just sitting around the fjords enjoying his newfound status. No, he wanted to expand his influence and make alliances, and in Viking terms, alliance often meant I will not raid your village, for now. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still plenty of people in Norway who were like, who does this guy think he is? With his fancy grey cloak and his dreams of ruling everything. One of them was a guy named Håkon Sigurdsson, who was like the ultimate Norwegian rival boss fight. So Harald decided to pay a little visit to Denmark. Now, I'm not saying that going to Denmark in those days was a mistake, but let's just say the Danes weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Harald met with Harald Bluetooth, you know, the guy whose name is now on your phone, and thought he could get a sweet alliance deal going. But here's where things take a twist. Turns out Harald Bluetooth was more into double-crossing than deal-making, so Bluetooth set up a nice little trap for Harald Gråfell. In the year 970, Harald Gråfell was ambushed and killed. They say he was lured into the trap by the promise of peace. And in Viking terms, peace usually means you're about to get stabbed. And so Harald Gråfell met his end. His grey cloak stained with red, his ambitions cut short by betrayal. His brothers, who had fought beside him, would go on to rule for a bit longer, but his legacy, well, it's kind of mixed. In modern terms, you could say Harald was a guy who climbed the corporate ladder only to find out the top floor was a trap. But hey, at least he gave it a shot. And really, isn't that what matters? Pause for effect. So next time you're fighting with your siblings over whose turn it is to do the dishes, just remember, it could be worse. You could be fighting for the throne of Norway. End. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a Viking sword like and subscribe.